good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Free Thought Hour. Now, we have Tercia. She's not in, what do they call it? Not lockdown, but load shedding tonight. But poor girl, she's had, I think personally, I'm not a doctor, but I think it's COVID. So she's all very under the doze, poor girl. Anyway, welcome to you, Tercia.
Thank you. Yes, I have. You always ask, how the devil are you? And I was thinking tonight, I'll just say the devil's sitting in my sinuses. So we'll see how it goes. If I start
Yes.
coughing, I'll just mute and go out.
Oh, dear,
And
dearie me.
so I think you're right. I think it was COVID too, because we've all had
Mm,
it, and it's been taken a while
yeah.
to recover. But then again, we should be grateful that we're still alive. If it was
Yeah,
indeed COVID, it would have been much worse. So I'm
absolutely.
here, raspy and croaky and phlegmy and all blocked up. But
Ugh.
let's see if I can get some conversation going with Mary. I'm so excited about our guest.
Well, fortunately, before you gave that list of complaints and symptoms, I have eaten my dinner, so I'm not vomiting at the sound of it. Anyway, let's welcome our guest. Here she is, Mary. How the devil
Hi.
are you?
Well, I'd like to say I'm just here drinking my coffee, it's a normal day for people that know me. Just
Mm,
um, the devil's coming out in my keyboard and my things that I do. Like, yeah,
So
I've sent some interesting emails this last week, so there's that.
yeah. Well, first of
Mary,
all,
sorry, John, I was going to say to Mary, she asked, why did we want to, or why did you find her to have as a guest? And I was going to tell Mary that you have a knack of finding all sorts of weird creatures in the woodwork. I mean, you found me on Facebook. I'm not sure where you found Mary, but I'm very excited because the only thing I know about the Amish is that you guys shun electricity, which would make you perfectly suited to move to South Africa because we have load shedding.
Okay, okay, I'm a time out for just a minute. Time out. Let's really start with like one of the things that is often a broad narrative about Amish people is that they're broadly classified as not using electricity. However, comma pause. When you consider that that is a stereotype and that there are Amish people that actually have electricity in their homes that are of a different variety, or even Amish people, like I grew up in I was born into an Ape Troyer Amish community, and then I lived in an old order Amish community that was different, and then I lived in another old order Amish community that was also different, and then I lived in another old order Amish community that was also different, and then I lived in another one, and that's the one I escaped from. But regardless, like each of those communities had varying rules
mm,
because they have a different structure. They have a different societal structure. But also
uh-huh.
the fact of the matter is there's New Order Amish, there's Beachy Amish, there's Amish
Mm,
Mennonites, there's Amish people that
wow.
drive cars and go to college. But
Yeah,
what
yeah.
people by and large know about Amish is, oh, we shun electricity. When in
Mm.
fact, inside of those Amish communities. So, what is the definition of electricity? Can you tell me?
It's a,
Moving atoms.
it's a flow of current.
Okay, that creates energy, right? How do we
Hmm.
how do we achieve that?
Oh, it's a form of energy. Uh,
R-
we can achieve it in a number of ways. We can generate it by whirling magnets around inside coils, or the other way around, or from a chemical reaction where reagents are reacted in the battery and degenerated. Sometimes they can be reversed, and electricity can be put in to restore them to the original charge.
Okay, so as an Amish child, when I was sitting there using a 2.5 horsepower Honda motor powered by gasoline to
Mm,
run our old fashioned washing machine from like the 1950s with a wringer, it's Maytag
mm.
washing machine, was I
Oh,
using electricity?
it depends on who you ask, I
Oh,
suppose.
sure you were,
Depends on
yeah.
who the elder is.
Yeah.
And furthermore, when on our farms that we lived on, because I lived on three different farms. When we had tractors in one community I lived in, we had tractors on the farms.
Mm.
What were those tractors doing? How were they powered?
Well, they were probably powered by diesel, but they probably also had a starter motor, which was electric. And they probably generated electricity to use for lights and other things.
Exactly.
Oh, we're talking
That's
about
kind
conversion
of my
rate.
point.
Yes.
Exactly. Mary, I want to come back to something that you mentioned in the chat before we went live. And that is that the Amish or the tradition stems from the Anabaptist tradition. And so what I know about my church history is that, so you had the Roman Catholic, the first schism was between the Eastern Catholic and then the Western Catholic Church. So the Roman Catholic Church is the Western Catholic Church, and the Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox to a lesser extent, that's the Eastern branch. And then the next major schism in the Christian faith was the Reformation. And that am I right if I say that the way I remember my church history, the Amish stem from the Anabaptists who interpreted the teachings of Martin Luther and the Moravians. The Moravians, there was a bunch of them who said that you have to. They interpreted the scripture about baptism differently to the Roman Catholic Church, and that's why they were called the Anabaptists, because they had no problem. In fact, they sometimes required that one is baptized again, even though one was baptized as an infant. And I think that they don't believe in infant baptism. And to me, that was one of the big questions in my deconversion is how is it possible that you can have one faith that has so many different interpretations of the same text? So what you mentioned here about electricity is the most supreme example of how you literally how Christianity and many other religions literally play around with definitions. Because if you want to think about it, what's happening in our brains right now is there's chemical electricity going on there, albeit a very small or very low voltage.
Hmm.
John, is it right? Technically, we shouldn't be doing anything because then we're using electricity, depending on how you define
Right,
it, you know. So,
right.
so am I right about the Anabaptists and the
So
story from?
partially, partially.
Okay.
So Amish people are absolutely transcended from that movement. However, comma pause. So while we're apostates, specifically from a very known movement, we're apostates from when the Reformation movement happened. There was a man named Menno Simmons, and he started what is formally known now as the Mennonites. And so,
Okay.
okay, and so then there was this guy named Jacob Ammon who him and his followers did not think that they were interpreting the rules about shunning appropriately. And so they broke away. They still remained Anabaptists, but they broke away from the Mennonite church. So we actually are apostates from the Mennonite church, essentially.
Right.
So,
And the
so
Mennonites are apostates from the Catholics.
right. So, what are the ones that our stereotype is based on? You know, because we've seen all these black and white movies of um, sort of historic lifestyles, horses and carts, and windmills, and
Okay.
no
Okay.
electricity. Is that the
Let me
Huttites or?
Okay, no. See, like here's the thing is the Hutterites are another form of Anabaptist. The German
Ah,
Brethren, the Dunkard Brethren. There's a
ah,
whole bunch of Anabaptists that aren't even like Mennonite or Amish.
ah,
There's plain people. So what people often conflate is this idea of like anybody plain has to be Amish. That's not true. To be plain is not to be Amish. To be plain simply means to live a plain lifestyle, dress simply, live plain. Okay?
oh.
But people of various religious groups can live plain. Now, when you start talking about stereotypes, the specific ones, I have a whole list of them if you would like to hear them.
Wow. So what amazes me is, I'm used to the more mainstream Christian denominations having a number of different, I'm not going to use the word cults, sub-denominations. I'm
High
tiptoeing around.
control religious groups.
Yeah, okay, right. But I'm used to them having 30,000 different varieties. But what surprises me is that what I thought previously was just one of these different varieties has its own sub branches, which seems to be almost as numerous.
No, you can literally live in the same community, and there's like so many different church districts, and the way that you have to understand Amish culture as a whole.
Mm,
And part of my deconstruction has been actually understanding how Amish culture works and how functions and how it affects you. And so, with that being said, like inside of the communities that I lived in, like the old order type and the Abe Troyer type, like the churches were structured very specifically. So, you would have a community that was considered a settlement, a community, and there would be various church districts depending on the size of the community. But
mhm,
each church district is set up similarly. You would have and think like caste system. If you know what a caste
mm,
system
mm,
is.
mm,
So you would
Mm,
mm,
think like up here on top of the ladder, that's like your bishop, your two ministers, and your deacon, and people who are from a good family, people who have a good name,
mm,
people who are wealthy businessmen and they're affluent in the community, people who contribute in a very positive way to the community. And then you have your middle class, and then you have people who are lower class. You have your poor people. If
mm,
the church has to help you, that can make you move down on like the ladder. If like
mm,
for example, your one of your parents dies when you're a child, even as a child, that can cause you to lose social status because now the church has to step in and help your family to stay alive, to survive, basically.
mm,
If you can't have children, like let's say you get married and you can't have children, you might lose social status. But then
mm.
on the offset, like if your community even allows you to adopt and you maybe adopt a child, then you might gain back social status.
Oh, interesting. So you've
Um,
already used the word shunning in
it's
relation to technology, but I've my understanding of shunning in relation to the Amish is that it's social shunning. Tell us about that. Have I got it wrong, or is there?
let me just point to this poster. This says it all.
Yeah.
Shunning kills. Prosecution is not persecution. Amish are not above the law, and we stand in solidarity with those who have been shunned and in memory of the shunned who have died. Because
Ah.
the shunning that happens inside of Amish communities, is it social shunning? Yes. Can it be employed in a variety of ways? Yes. So we don't actually, like we call it the Bon and Maidong. Let's say you get in trouble with the church and they decide that you need to be placed in the Bon, and they will take a rote on that, and then they will place you in the Bon. And once like
So,
that period is over, it's like used as a form of discipline, but also for those who become Amish apostates, we are shunned.
so
And
what is
for
this word?
me, that
What what
resulted sorry,
what is this word you're using? Barn?
Bon.
Barn. It's an actual agricultural building.
No,
No.
no, it's a term that we use.
Ah.
Like
Okay.
it's a term that we use because
Yes.
also my first language is PA Dutch. English is my second language.
Okay. You'll be able to speak
so you'd
Dutch
be
to
able to
Persia.
understand my Afrikaans, Mary. So you'd be able to understand Afrikaans because Afrikaans is, well, some people say it's a dialect of Dutch.
No,
So if I
no,
say,
no,
what, is it not the same?
no, no. I do not understand Dutch. I do not. No,
Mm,
Okay, okay.
it's
mm,
So
we.
what is PA Dutch? Is it Pennsylvania
It's
Dutch?
our language. Yeah, it's Pennsylvania Dutch, but it is our
Can you
language.
say
That is
something? Can you say something? I'd like to hear if I can understand any of it. Can you say something like,
Her her meine
"Good
woorden
morning"?
vernemen, mein Schwein, mein König, mein Gott, mein Molalini sind Salomon Mabeda.
That sounds
It's
like speaking in tongues.
it's Old Dutch, and I think it's also
That
related
is
to
that is what our church, because here's the other part, is we also learn High German.
yes,
And
and
so we are technically
Low
trilingual.
German, yeah.
But like our Bibles and our like in my communities, our Bibles and our New Testaments and everything was in High German.
Ah.
Yes, I can understand. I can get that.
So
I
so
don't
that was
understand any of it.
something that they say before every prayer in church. So that's why it would come across as like more German. But like
Ah.
PA Dutch
Yes.
would be like
Mm.
Hele was bist du du and zushu in the shuge hit.
Okay.
So
Maybe.
how did you now, I understand, have left all this behind? You've called yourself, you've been through deconstruction. So how did that happen?
Well, there's a very specific moment that I write about in my book where I talk about reading the Bible.
Ah, another one. Another one.
Another one.
Reading the Bible, okay?
Yes, yes, we've heard it before.
And
Yes.
being told, okay, my stepfather, so my mother was a widow. I think before I get into that, let me just tell you a little bit more about the shunning,
Yeah,
though, because I
sure.
didn't finish telling you about the specifics of the shunning. So,
Okay.
like for me, um, the ways that my community responded, some of that is actually documented in a docu-series about Amish abuse. It's called Sins of the Amish, and it's on Peacock TV. But what you will see is that when I reported the abuse that I experienced to the authorities and people were arrested and charged and prosecuted, there were 4 busloads of Amish people who showed up at a court hearing in support of the perpetrators of SA of a child. And furthermore, they got up on the witness stand and they cried for them. They testified for them. They wrote letters to the district attorney and they cast me out and shunned me in a way that I can't begin to describe what they really did. And when I left the courthouse that day, they tried to prevent me from leaving. When I got in my car, there was my cousin with his foot in my door. I couldn't even close my car door.
Bloody hell.
Furthermore, when my brother died in December of 2004, when that happened, and I went to his funeral, I had an escort of 3 other people who also understood the language, and they sent 12 men out to tell me that everybody else can walk through and view him, but I'm not allowed to because it's my fault that they went to prison. So you want to talk about shunning? How's that for shunning?
Yeah, you've been through it, you
Mary,
poor
next
girl.
time I wanted. I'm so sorry to hear your story, but before you even told it, I was going to say that one of the stereotypes that I think exists of the Amish people is that they're very tolerant and they're very they show love and caring. But that's mostly in my, as far as I've watched a few documentaries about the Amish people too, and what I've picked up, and it's very common, is that it's most of these groups are very kind and very loving and forgiving to outsiders. But if you're an insider who then steps outside of the circle, that's worse. If you, for an insider to become an outsider, it's better to be an outsider from the start than to have been in and then
Well,
stand
yes.
up. Are you familiar? And it works like that because I have not experienced anything of the kind that you've experienced. So I wouldn't even presume to say that I understand what you've been going through. But in our community, I live in the Afrikaans community in South Africa, and it's a very religious community. And I haven't been shunned in by my family because they're all also deconverted, but we have been excluded as a family from social circles and from I probably will never be employed as a teacher again in my community because of one fact, and that's the fact that I've deconverted. And I've been told by members of the in group that it's better to be out than to have been in and then move out. So I want to ask you just something. Have you ever heard of Sam Mullet? Are you
Yep.
familiar with? Are you? So was he? Because I know he's in prison. He's been sentenced to prison.
Yeah,
He
he's
was.
in prison because apparently, we're really going to do this where, authorities actually sit there. You sit there and you talk about the stereotypes that you experience. The peaceful, gentle people. These are stereotypes. The stereotype is that we're all good cooks. We're all good housekeepers. We're good seamstresses. We always have community support. We're always loving. And we're excellent furniture makers. And
Yes.
hard workers and farmers and can build things, and we're really good at food preservation. We're good quilters. And
Yes.
the other stereotype, and this is a whole other conversation. We can't finish this today, but Rumspringa gives you the option to experience English life or the choice to be Amish or English without repercussions, and that women love children and find all of our fulfillment in raising them. Furthermore,
Mm,
so those are just some of the stereotypes, right? But
mm,
also, like, part of what I want to say to you is that in regards to the idea that it is better to never have been that than it is for you to have been born in there. Like, we actually I heard preachings about the fact of, like, it is a privilege to be born Amish. And
mm,
for you to go out into the world, and I'm loosely translating here because it doesn't translate correctly, for you to go out into the world is for you to take that gift, that privilege, and step on it with your feet. And when it comes to Sam Mullet, okay, so I have been listening to the stories of CSA survivors for over 19 years, and there are multiple Amish survivors who go to law enforcement and try to report having experienced abuse within these communities, and law enforcement doesn't even open an investigation. Oh, but when we cut off Amish men's beards, now we're going to care? That's when we
Exactly.
care? What is wrong with you?
mm.
Why do you think are the authorities so loath to investigate abuse cases?
Stereotypes, bias,
Mm,
prejudice.
Okay.
mm.
And
Yeah, we
and
love a
and the
stereotype.
victim,
It's a human failing.
Say what?
I said we love a stereotype. It's a human failing. We
Oh, it
like
really is.
we like to categorize people into a narrow box so that
Right,
we can then other them. They're
right.
not part of our tribe. They're
And
the
it's not
others.
my problem.
Mm.
mm,
It's a
mm,
human weakness. And I wanted to mention
Furthermore,
that.
let me also put it this way. Out of the three people that I will tell you about that knew that I experienced abuse as an Amish child when it was actively happening. The excuses for not doing anything is we have to preserve our business relationships. We didn't know what to do.
Mm,
Well, we didn't know that the law applied to them. Amish people take care of themselves.
mm, mm.
You know,
Yeah,
just
was there ever
or
was there
the go ahead.
I wanted to ask whether the argument was ever brought by the defenders of the abusers that the unity of the congregation is to be guarded at all cost. Was that ever mentioned? Because I was involved, and not
Oh
in
no,
not
they were actively talking about the abusers being a good Amish man.
mm,
Oh,
okay.
he's a good hard worker.
mm,
And he takes his kids fishing. Okay, but
mm.
I digress.
Yeah.
Back to the deconstruction journey. So part of what happened is that as a child, I read the Bible multiple times, and of course, like, here's the thing: when you start reading the Bible and you find conflicting information. Okay, so number one, do y'all remember the story in the Bible of the if the woman is out on the fields and she's raped?
And she
What are
doesn't.
they supposed?
So it's if she's raped in the fields and she's shouted and nobody could hear her, then there will be retribution to the rapist. But if she's in a city, then
Uh
she
huh.
didn't scream
Uh
loudly
huh.
enough. So it's
Uh
her
huh.
fault that she was raped because she
Uh
didn't
huh.
choose the right place to be raped. Yeah, that's
Uh huh.
basically what it boils down to.
Or the one where if, like, the woman is raped and and then the father is to arrange marriage with the rapist. That
Yes.
part.
Yes.
Those
Yes, so the rapist punishment is that he has to marry somebody that he despoiled. So,
Mm.
so that's the punishment, that the rapist has
Yes.
to now marry the
Yes.
damaged goods. I mean,
Yes.
that's the reason behind
right.
it. Which is
And then the other
so,
part is when so one I escaped purely like literally because of the abuse that I experienced. That's how I escaped. Two, the deconstruction was also influenced by that in part because part of what happened with me is I was like, I want to know more. So I started attending when I joined the military, I started attending all these different
Oh,
church services.
oh,
Y'all, it was
interesting.
wild. I was just like, wait, like they're all the same. They are all the same. You change a few things, they're all the same. I don't see any difference. And then I started reading about like and learning about the origins of the Bible. And then I started realizing like I started getting into these huge debates. Now I have a brother that also is a Amish apostate, except him and I don't speak anymore, which is another tragedy. But here's the thing: you're not going to tell me I'm going to hell and then ask me for money. That doesn't work. No. Or ask me for other support, regardless.
It's
Anyways,
it's
so
interesting. It's interesting that you've been in the military, because when you were saying how um, the the loyalty in the Amish locality is very inwards to the fellow members of the tribe, but also tolerant of outsiders until there's some threat to the cohesion of the group, in which case the intolerance turns inwards and oppresses the more vulnerable members of that very tribe. And it reminded me of the military uh, culture, where you're raised in the military. Well, you're in the military. You're taught to be aggressive and to hate the enemy, pretty much. And but
shoot him in
then
the
when
face.
but, but then when you do something that is against the regulations, against the control of from the hierarchy of the military, then you get shot by them.
Uh-huh.
yeah, yep,
So
very
it
ironic.
rang bells of similarity in my head.
Yeah. I mean, so here's the thing about the military. I'm not going to pretend that the military is perfect by any means. And I'm just saying, in my experience, um, the military gave me values to replace
Yeah.
some really skewed values that I had. It
Yeah.
got me into a place in my life where I could feel safety,
Yes. Yes.
because I was harassed. It got me out of the state. It got me away from
Yes.
that. And I will always be grateful for that. It opened
Yes.
doors for me. It
Yes.
allowed me to do things I never dreamt I would do.
Yes. It broadened
But in
your
this
horizon.
But
Yes.
in the same token, it also challenged my perceptions of like black people, for example,
Hmm.
because like I grew up in an environment where I would watch people like my egg donor, for example, she would not accept money from a black cashier
Mm.
because those people were from Cain.
Yes. Yes. Mm.
That's an
So,
interesting. That's something I want to ask you about that because as far as I know, and this is probably one of my stereotypical ideas, the Amish in America is more geographic, historically at least. It's more centered around Pennsylvania and a certain geography. Although I know that there was some Western movement as well, obviously in the 1880s. But what is the general, are there black members of Amish communities? And what is the general attitude towards race in the Amish community? It's not something I've ever heard spoken of. Maybe
okay.
because it's interesting now
Well,
that you
so
mention it. Because, yeah.
in the in the old order Amish communities that I lived in, there was literally only one community that would have accepted any form of outsiders. And that person's story is actually, she has a book published. Her book is called Tears of the Silenced. But basically, if you're not born in, you can't attain any, like, your status is never going to be as if you were born in. And furthermore, like, we don't, like, I've never seen a Black Amish person in the communities that I lived in, but there are some Amish people that do have occasions where they maybe have Black church members, whether that happens by adopting children or even fostering children. But at the end of the day, the one that I am intimately familiar with, this child was adopted by an Amish family. And then um, when they became of an age to marry, they told the child to leave the community because um, they shouldn't mingle races. However, again, remember there's such a large variety of Amish communities that we can't label them too broadly with one brush.
Mm, mm. I want to ask you something else. You mentioned that you had an egg donor. What is the Amish? Well, again, it possibly varies between all the different groups. In general, is there what is the practice as far as contraception is concerned? I can imagine that abortion is a big no. I can't imagine them being pro-life, but are they as bad as the
Okay, well,
Catholics?
let's just say. What is the Amish practice on contraception? Well, let's just say. So, my egg donor knew that I was being essayed as a child, and once I reached the age where I could have become impregnated by rape, um, I drank a lot of tea that I now know is an abortifacient.
Okay.
However, that is really frowned upon if people knew about it. And however, I was also informed that because I was supposed to get married and I narrowly escaped that. But I was informed that when I get married, I have to do whatever my husband says whenever he says, and that means inside the bedroom and out.
Mm.
And when you're told that and you sit in church and you listen to a woman who gave birth to 14 children
Yeah.
confess her sins
Yeah.
for not upholding her marriage bed properly. It's
What do you
called consent and bodily autonomy. What is this? My bad. I'm really there.
Okay. And I
So,
suppose that oh my goodness. So it's worse than the Catholic Church because in the Catholic Church, at least women have, in practice, Catholic women, you don't have to follow the rules if you're Catholic. You can be sort of, you don't have to follow the rules. Um, it's a bit like being Jewish, and being Catholic to many people is like being, you can be a cultural Catholic, but with the Amish, it's not like that. If you don't follow the rules, is there a thing like if you haven't been to church on a Sunday that they'll send an elder or a deacon or somebody to come and check up on why you haven't been attending church? Is that a thing? Because that was a thing in the community that I grew up in.
Oh, if you don't go to
It is not
church on
Amish.
Sunday, they'll talk about why you weren't at church. You better have a good reason for why you weren't at church. I have never seen a better gossip system than inside of Amish communities.
mm,
Literally never. You would think that because of lack of technology, but again, we already talked about that a
mm.
little bit. So, like, I grew up in communities where, believe it or not, like one of the communities that I lived in, they now have cell phones for business.
Oh, mm. Yeah, very modern.
Another like all the other communities, as far as I know, either they have cell phones for business or they have like phone shacks that they own and they pay the bill for and they use those phones for business. Like, uh,
If you've seen it, I watched a very good documentary. I don't remember, I watched so many, but it's about an Amish split. Sorry about that. It's an Amish splinter group that actually moved to South America because, and
are
they
you
started a
talking about
new.
the documentary Women Talking?
No, it's not women talking. It's not about women only. It just follows these 4 or 5 families who break off from an Amish community in the United States, and they travel to some South American country where there's actually a large number of Amish people who moved there because the communities in the States were seen as too liberal. And there's a so they these I think there are about 5 or 6 families, and they split off, and they literally go into the Amazon jungle and they start a new community there. And one of the reasons for the split was that there was a group who said that it's fine to have cell phones. And the one chap was actually trained as he had some medical training, and he kept a cell phone because there had been some medical emergencies where he had been people had been able to reach him, and he could actually prevent serious repercussions. So some of the community members said, no, it's fine for him to have a cell phone so that people can go to a neighbor or somewhere to call him for medical help. And then the community split because there were those who felt that that is absolutely uncalled for and should not be allowed, that anybody should be able to keep a cell phone. So I just,
Okay,
if
well,
you know, I
first
think,
off, let me just give you a brief overview of like typical older Amish education. So like even if like they may have, it depends on the type of Amish, but I'd really like to know the name of this documentary, because one of the things that people also fail to understand is that in 1972 there was a Supreme Court ruling called Wisconsin versus Yoder, and with that Supreme Court ruling, what happened is that there were these Amish families in Wisconsin, and they were fighting the compulsory education for their kids, and they won. They hired powerful attorneys and they won when it went to the Supreme Court. But what that did is that created the situation, like for example, where when you read the footnotes of that ruling, what you'll actually read is that Amish people don't commit crimes, which is also another stereotype. So is that law based in stereotypes? Secondly, what they did is they denied all Amish children an education beyond 8th grade. Thirdly, they gave the Amish church full permission to dictate what the curriculum contains. Fourthly, we now have schools where I went to schools. I went to 5 different Amish schools in 3 different communities. And in all of those schools, we had various school books that had like pages removed,
Yes.
pages stapled together, things
Yes.
blacked out, like
Mm.
removed, like, and furthermore, like, yes, we have school boards to monitor, but the ministry oversees that. So ultimately, all of it is monitored as church approved content. We have
Mm.
publishers like Pathway Publishers, we have Raver's Bookstore, and they publish primarily our curriculum content. There's math, there's like we don't even call it math, for example. We call it reading, writing, arithmetic, maybe a little of geography and history at the end of your schooling. We might have some phonics, and we learn English, and we learn High German.
Mm.
So I'd really like to know where this person got their medical education, because furthermore, when I was 14, 15 years old, I went to an Amish dentist who did not have a medical education or a dental education, who proceeded to inject my face with, are you ready for this? Cow
I didn't know what
Novocaine
to say.
in his living room. Cow Novocaine
Oh,
in his living room, where he then proceeded to pull my wisdom teeth, where I could feel the entire tooth coming out from here. So please, I'd love to know what the name of this documentary is.
well, let me be clear that it was said in
Yeah.
the documentary that this was not a doctor. This guy had picked up some medical, so it was very much like your dentist experience. This, but if they go
Do
to
some
Belize, I just looked it up. It's
do
but
some
but
googling. Do some googling for it, Tertia. Yeah. Well, I was going to
I
ask.
will send you the link. Yeah, I'll send it. I'll find it. I'll send you the link, Mary, because you'll find it very interesting. But they go to Belize. There's a strong Amish and Mennonite community in
Yeah,
Belize.
I just have to wonder if it's my. Never mind. I'm a I'm gonna wait and see. I'm gonna wait and see. I just have to
Okay.
wonder because I have so many questions. Because I'm just like,
Oh, you will enjoy that documentary. It was very neutrally made. It was definitely not pro Amish. It was I found it quite interesting. It was definitely I found they tried to be honest in the telling of the story, and but, it was clear to me that the community was fraught with conflict, and that there were splits and off splinters, and I was just
yeah,
I just think it's a very harmful situation to keep up. And can I ask, how long have you been out of the community? How long have you been sort of
19 years
okay? That's a
in
while,
about 3 weeks.
and I think it's you counting the days. I can see that the scars are really deep, and I understand that because I don't think people know the damage that religion does, and especially if you have to fight against the system on top of finding new society, making new. You have to build a whole new life when you get shunned, because you lose everything.
Well, it's not even just like you lose everything. It's like you don't necessarily have the skills or the framework from within which to build a new life. You don't
Yes.
necessarily have the tools to navigate that. And if there are tools available, you may not know about those tools.
I can see how the army would have helped you in that respect as a sort of
Yes.
transitory uh, between the two position. I was going to ask about how Amish deal with health issues, whether there's, high infant mortality, but you've sort of answered that by your discussion or your revelation about the amateur dentist. Is it all amateur, or do you have Amish hospitals, or I know, yes. Or do you bite the bullet and go into a non-Amish hospital if you're desperately ill? What happens?
So for example, my egg donor got remarried um, after 7 years of being a widow to a widower from Wisconsin. And I also had two brothers who passed away. Um, one of them had spinal meningitis and he had spinal cord damage. And so he had grand mal seizures. And with my stepfather, um, they stopped giving him Dilantin. I don't know if you know what that is, but like it was like it's a anti-seizure medication.
Yeah.
But and my stepfather had a heart attack, and he went up to the local hospital and had a triple bypass surgery that was
Oh,
paid for by Medicare because even though the church didn't really support it,
mm,
he was worthy of that medical care. So it really
oh,
can be dependent on like who's in control and who's in
ah,
charge and what the
mm,
church decides and says
I
as
see.
to like the kind of type of care you might get. There's a
Mm,
lot of chiropractors and
mhm,
dentists and like
mm,
what's the name for the people orthodontists who create like dentures and
yeah,
stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, you have Amish people who practice that too,
Ah, mm,
or like there'll be like midwives. Like my grandmother was a midwife,
mm,
things
And
like that.
homeopathy, I suppose, homeopathy would also, because and natural sort of
Well,
natural products and
and
like
furthermore, like here's the thing that really fucking pisses me off, quite frankly. Um, I'll I'll never forget being a kid and watching and seeing like all of the things like for me, I write about medical care in my book too. I write
yeah,
about my personal experience with that.
mhm,
But one of the things that happened as a result of the abuse that I experienced is like I wet my bed. And so they took me to another state to a doctor, an Amish doctor, right, who gave me like these herbs, which I also passed out sometimes as a kid. And like now I know that those herbs are actually known to have a side effect of that. Or like, it was like this thing of like, if you just pray hard enough and you have enough faith and you take these
Mm,
herbs, or, you do that thing with the nail clipper, like this is, it's no. And
it's
then there
different.
was this other thing where we had this machine with electrodes, like a battery powered machine, and it
Uh-huh.
was supposed to like bring your body into balance or
Yeah.
something. And
Oh,
that kind of stuff. Like, I'm just like,
Mm,
oh my God, like chiropractors, that kind of stuff, like
mm,
alternative medicine. And
mm,
to a point, like just the fact of like alternative medicine, like
mm.
even that name gives me a sour taste in my
Yeah.
mouth.
Yeah. Well, if alternative medicine was any good, it would have become medicine. So,
There
um,
is that point. And,
yeah.
sure, you can drink a cup of tea and it can give you comfort, but also, like, don't just be ingesting stuff just because you can. Like,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, it
Anyway,
seems to me that in order to receive decent medical attention, non-Amish medical attention, you know, what you might call normal medical attention, you have to have sufficient status in the Amish community to be deemed worthy of treatment. Is that right?
maybe in your family or in the community, it depends on whether you
Mm,
can afford to pay for it yourself or
mm,
not, or
mm,
if the
mm,
church has to pay for it, or even like furthermore, like another experience with medical care is I was a small child when I had symptoms of the abuse, physical symptoms of the sexual abuse, and I couldn't speak English well enough to tell them.
mm,
And so,
mm,
like, medical professionals, like, literally did what I now know as somebody who has worked in medical for over a decade, is they did the questionnaire, they did what they were supposed to, but where they fucked up, they brought in my egg donor to translate for me, and she lied to them straight to their faces. When I said yes,
because
she said no.
no.
And then she told me to shut up. We don't talk about that to outsiders.
mm. Oh dear. Well,
So part of all of that is tied into like the deconstruction, right?
yeah. Mm,
And with the deconstruction, it's kind of like I I listen to all these people talking about how God has healed them from all of this and
mm,
how like they don't have anything and blah 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 blah. And it's like, but I can never attain that. And I've literally, after I studied like all of these different religions, then I started studying Buddhism, and then
mm,
I was like, okay, let me study paganism. So then I
mm,
studied paganism, and then I started looking at Satanism.
mm,
And then I was like, you know what? I refuse to be affiliated with any organized religion whatsoever. First
mm,
off, if God is real and he can look down and see all of these atrocities that are happening, what kind of fucking God is
mm,
he?
mm.
I want to know. I'm sorry, I'm cursing on your show. I'm really going
We
there.
forgive you. You're forgiven. I bless
Yeah,
you, child. You are forgiven.
we understand
Yeah.
you've been through trauma. We understand. I was going to ask because what you said about the electric thing you hold, it reminded me of Scientology and their e-meter. Another bogus religion which tries to subdues a community so that the leaders can have their way.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mary, I want to ask about the work that you do now. I went onto your website and I see that you're an activist to help victims of sexual abuse and abuse in the Amish community. That must be like an uphill battle because I can't imagine you being welcomed with open arms. I mean,
You might be
so
surprised.
okay.
You,
Tell us a little bit about that. I'd be
um, well, I mean, of course, there's Amish people that are really horrified by me.
Yes, I can imagine.
There's there's Amish people that preach against me. There's Amish people that are, like she's just angry and unforgiving, you know. But there's also the thing that people fail to remember is that Amish people are just people.
Mm,
And if we demonize them all, we're not doing them any favors. And if we worship them all, we're not doing them any favors.
Mm.
And until we put them solidly on the ground where they are human beings, we can't even begin to serve Amish people as human beings.
Mm.
And so part of what I do is I actually work to ensure that Amish people are seen as human beings.
Yeah.
Because again, like just because this was my experience, that doesn't mean that that's everybody's experience.
Yeah.
People who come from the bottom of the ladder in that caste system versus people who come from the top of the ladder, they have vastly different experiences.
Yes.
And historically, academia and media has told the stories of the people only at the top of the ladder, or
Mhm.
told the narrative that people at the top of the ladder want, which is good for business because Amish is not just a religion, it's also a business.
Yes.
And furthermore, when you start talking about Amish as a whole, what is it? It's a business, it's a culture, it's a religion, and it's
Mm.
also genetics. Because what happened is that we have been intermarrying with our
Yes.
cousins for so long. And it's not
Yes.
even saying we married our first cousins, it's saying that we've been intermarrying distant relatives for so long that we have a disproportionate rate of genetic disorders, and they call
Yes.
it in academia, they call it the founder effect. But
Oh, yes.
regardless, like my genetic conditions will never go away just because I don't go to Amish church. So I don't even
Mm.
feel comfortable calling myself like ex Amish. And I know there's people that feel that's sad, but I feel like
Yes.
that's a part of me. And, why should I reject that part of me as being lesser than?
Yes.
No, I can't do that. And so part of what I did is I became certified as a life coach, and I also became
Mm.
certified to do research. So I co-wrote a research study on CSA and Amish, Mennonite, Anabaptist, and other religious communities.
Mm.
And we're working on getting an article submitted for publication, we hope by the end of this year. But we did put out information for the people who responded to the survey on our website for the simple fact that we believe strongly that part of what has happened is that the most marginalized Amish people have been completely eliminated from the academic sources about Amish people. And
Mm.
so we want them to know that even if it takes 2 years for this research to be published, they have access to information about our findings.
Right. Well, I want to promote your book because you've written this book, which is available on eBay. No, on Amazon, and the cover looks like this. There you, there you are.
Oh my.
I like your
and
face.
and it's got a a title, which is, you saw the title there, but it's got a URL that you can go to. And what I've done is I have shortened it so that it's easy to write down. This is the URL, tinyurl.com 2RSMNBFD will take you to the Amazon page where you can buy Mary's book. She also has a website, which she's going to tell us the name of right now.
www.themisfitamish.com.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is afterlife. I mean, because a lot of these more extreme cults have special attitudes towards. Isn't it the Mormons who, when they die, they get a whole planet?
Okay.
Depends who they are.
Okay, but we don't actually believe in assurance of salvation.
Oh, interesting. Mm.
We live in fear.
You never know.
Ah,
The tradition that I'm from has very several touching points with the Amish. We also like that. You never know. You can never be sure because it's not your choice.
It's
God
not
chooses
your
you,
choice.
and you
And
never know.
you can only strive to be as Christ-like as possible and then hope that by the grace of God
Yep.
that you might earn your seat on
Yep.
in glory
Well,
land,
in
pretty
my
much.
case, it was you might have been lucky enough that you were chosen before you were born. So what do you do really if you be good things,
Oh,
that's a sign that you might have been chosen before you were born. Because the branch of Christianity that I grew up in, believes in predestination. So you can be as good as you want to be. There's just nothing you can do. And if you weren't chosen, and you were chosen before the creation of the universe or not, so you never know.
oh my God. Well, see, but also like we do also kind of purport the idea that like the sins of the fathers rest on the children and the sins of the children rest on the parents. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Like,
both
Well,
both ways.
uh, definitely the sins of the fathers, and that every single child who's born is conceived in sin and born in sin and born into sin and
mm,
born because of sin,
oh
and
yeah.
in sin you're born and receive. Oh, you and I could have a nice cup of tea.
Well, I mean, but see, like for me, when I say I lived in fear, like I lived in fear for several reasons, but like the other thing is like I was always in fear of eternal hellfire and brimstone. And then like I was Amish when Y2K happened. Remember that? Y2K?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
Oh,
my
yeah.
God.
The end of the
I
world.
literally was told every day about the end of the world is coming and we must prepare. And I'm just like,
um,
Yeah, that was probably worse in America because they wanted to sell you cures for Y2K. Whereas,
well, but we were Amish, so, like, we had
yeah,
different access to that. It wasn't really
yes, yeah,
it was more or less like the revelations is happening.
mm,
But Mary, I just I can't see the Amish um, existing as such an insular group for much longer, because I mean, how do you keep children insulated against it must be, it must get harder and harder and more difficult. And would you say that, I know
You
we're
control
almost
access.
done.
If you
Sorry?
control access to information, you control the masses.
But in this case, I can just see that to control the access to information, you'll have to become more and more draconic in how you control the access, because it's so I can see that the risk of abuse being much greater. Because I mean, 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, when you didn't when there wasn't internet, it was much easier to control access to information. Where now, I mean, if you it's it's incredibly difficult to control access to information. So I can just imagine that parents and elders have to be so draconic and really be
mm,
like an all-seeing eye that watches almost. You have to put stricter measures in place, which is uh, it's it, it's worrisome. So obviously
mm.
you have your work cut out.
So get your shaker furniture now before all the manufacturers are stomped on by the internet. Anyway, guys, you've helped me out here. You've done almost an hour. And I just want to make sure that our viewers know we'll be back next week. We haven't, I'm not quite sure who's our guest is going to be. Perhaps,
I'll tell you, and this time I know that nothing will happen. Our guest
thank you.
next week is it's sorry, John. I'm very excited. It's a friend of mine, a fellow South African who is now a professor at the University of Mississippi.
Yep.
If well, he's in Mississippi. He's just written his first book. His book is called 42, and you can imagine that it's about cosmology and science. He is one of the youngest ever PhD candidates of Stellenbosch University. He's a professor in
And his,
biomechanical engineering, something like that.
and his
Young
name
father,
is,
Davy van den Heever.
I'm liking him already. Cosmology. Sounds like fun. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
so join us to meet Professor Davy or David. I don't know what he goes by, Davy or David, in the
Mm-hmm.
United States.
Mm.
Davy van der Heever. And check out, if you want to, in the meantime, please, Mary's book that I'm definitely going to take a look at, and Davy's book 42.
We'll
So see you next week,
promote
guys.
it next week. Yes. Well, it's a little while since we've had a fully grown scientist, so that will be fun. Okay, guys, thank you very much. It's time. Say bye bye. And I'll have to play the
Bye.
outro for you. Thank you very much. You've been wonderful. Where's the
Thank
outro? Oh,
you.
here it is.